Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiraye. We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 13? 14. Is that where we're starting? Okay. Chapter 14. Pregnancy of Diti in the evening. Shukadeva Goswami said, after hearing from the great sage Maitreya about the Lord's incarnation as Varaha, Vidura, who had taken a vow, begged him with folded hands to please narrate further transcendental activities of the Lord, since he, Vidura, did not yet feel satisfied. Sri Vidura said, O chief amongst the great sages, I have heard by disciplic succession that Hiranyaksha, the original demon, was slain by the same form of sacrifices, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sri Vidura said, O chief amongst the great sages, I have heard by disciplic succession that Hiranyaksha, the original demon, was slain by the same form of sacrifices, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Boar. Purport, as referred to previously, the boar incarnation was manifested in 2 millenniums, namely Swayambhuva and Chakshusha. In both millenniums there was a boar incarnation of the Lord, but in the Swayambhuva millennium he lifted the earth from within the water of the universe, whereas in the Chakshusha millennium he killed the first demon, Hiranyaksha. In the Swayambhuva millennium he assumed the color white, and in the Chakshusha millennium he assumed the color red. Vidura had already heard about one of them, and he proposed to hear about the other. The 2 different boar incarnations described are the one Supreme Personality of Godhead. What was the reason, O Brahmana, for the fight between the demon king and Lord Boar while the Lord was lifting the earth as his pastime? My mind has become very inquisitive, and therefore I'm not satisfied with hearing the narration of the Lord's appearance. Please therefore speak more and more to a devotee who is faithful. Purport, one who is actually faithful and inquisitive is qualified to hear the transcendental pastimes of the appearance and disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vidura was a suitable candidate to receive such transcendental messages. The great sage Maitreya said, O warrior, the inquiry made by you is just befitting a devotee, because it concerns the incarnation of the Personality of Godhead. He is a source of liberation from the chain of birth and death for all those who are otherwise destined to die. Purport, the great sage Maitreya addressed Vidura as a warrior, not only because Vidura belonged to the Kuru family, but because he was anxious to hear about the chivalrous activities of the Lord in his incarnation of Varaha and Nrsimha. Because the inquiries concerned the Lord, they were perfectly befitting a devotee. A devotee has no taste for hearing anything mundane. There are many topics of mundane warfare, but a devotee is not inclined to hear them. The topics of the warfare in which the Lord engages do not concern the war of death, but the war against the chain of Maya, which obliges one to accept repeated birth and death. In other words, one who takes delight in hearing the war topics of the Lord is relieved from the chains of birth and death. Foolish people are suspicious of Krishna's taking part in the battle of Kurukshetra, not knowing that his taking part ensured liberation for all who were present on the battlefield. It is said by Bhishma Dev that all who were present on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original spiritual existences after death. Therefore, hearing the war topics of the Lord is as good as any other devotional service. By hearing these topics from the sage Narada, the son of King Uttanapada, Dhruva, was enlightened regarding the personality of Godhead, and he ascended to the abode of the Lord, placing his feet over the head of death. While quitting his body, Maharaj Dhruva, the son of King Uttanapada, was attended by personalities like Sunanda and others, who received him in the kingdom of God. He left this world at an early age as a young boy, although he had attained the throne of his father and had several children of his own. Because he was due to quit this world, death was waiting for him. He did not care for death, however, and even with his present body, he boarded a spiritual airplane and went directly to the planet of Vishnu because of his association with the great sage Narada, who had spoken to him the narration of the pastimes of the Lord. This history of the fight between the Lord as a boar and the demon Hiranyaksha was heard by me in a year long ago, as it was described by the foremost of the demigods, Brahma, when he was questioned by the other demigods. Diti, daughter of Daksha, being afflicted with sex desire, begged her husband Kashyapa, the son of Marichi, to have intercourse with her in the evening in order to beget a child. The sun was setting and the sage was sitting in trance after offering oblations to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, whose tongue is the sacrificial fire. Fire is considered to be the tongue of the Personality of Godhead Vishnu, and oblations of grains and clarified butter offered to the fire are thus accepted by him. That is the principle of all sacrifice, of which Lord Vishnu is the master. In other words, the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu includes the satisfaction of all demigods and other living beings. In that place, the beautiful Diti expressed her desire. O learned one, Cupid is taking his arrow and distressing me forcibly as a mad elephant troubles a banana tree. Purport, beautiful Diti, seeing her husband absorbed in trance, began to speak loudly, not attempting to attract him by bodily expressions. She frankly said that her whole body was distressed by sex desire because of her husband's presence, just as a banana tree is troubled by a mad elephant. It was not natural for her to agitate her husband when he was in trance, but she could not control her strong sex appetite. Her sex desire was like a mad elephant, and therefore it was the prime duty of her husband to give her all protection by fulfilling her desire. Therefore you should be kind toward me by showing me complete mercy. I desire to have sons, and I am much distressed by seeing the opulence of my co-wives. By performing this act, you will become happy. In Bhagavad Gita, sexual intercourse for begetting children is accepted as righteous. A person sexually inclined for simple sense gratification, however, is unrighteous. In Diti's appeal to her husband for sex, it was not exactly that she was afflicted by sex desires, but she desired sons. Since she had no sons, she felt poorer than her co-wives. Therefore, Kashyapa was supposed to satisfy his bona fide wife. 12. A woman is honored in the world by the benediction of her husband, and a husband like you will become famous by having children, because you are meant for the expansion of living entities. Purport, according to Rishabhadeva, one should not become a father or mother unless one is confident that he can beget children whom he can deliver from the clutches of birth and death. Human life is the only opportunity to get out of the material scene, which is full of the miseries of birth, death, old age, and diseases. Every human being should be given the opportunity to take advantage of his human form of life, and a father like Kashyapa is supposed to beget good children for the purpose of liberation. In days long ago, our father, the most opulent Daksha, who was affectionate to his daughters, asked each of us separately whom we would prefer to select as our husband. Purport, it appears from this verse that free selection of a husband was allowed by the father, but not by free association. The daughters were asked separately to submit their selection of a husband who was famous for his acts and personality. The ultimate selection depended on the choice of the father. Our well-wishing father Daksha, after knowing our intentions, handed over 13 of his daughters unto you. And since then, we have all been faithful. Purport. Generally, the daughters were too shy to express their opinions before their father, but the father would accept the daughters' intentions through someone else, such as a grandmother to whom the grandchildren had free access. King Daksha collected the opinions of his daughters and thus handed over 13 to Kashyapa. Every one of Diti's sisters was a mother of children. Therefore, since she was equally faithful to the same husband, why should she remain without children? O lotus-eyed one, kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire. When someone in distress approaches a great person, his pleas should never go in vain. Purport. Diti knew well that her request might be rejected because of the untimely situation. But she pleaded that when there is an emergency or a distressful condition, there is no consideration of time and situation. O hero, Vidura, Diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. Purport. When a man or woman is afflicted by the lust of sex desire, it is to be understood as sinful contamination. Kashyapa was engaged in his spiritual activities, but he did not have sufficient strength to refuse his wife, who was thus afflicted. He could have refused her with strong words expressing impossibility, but he was not as spiritually strong as Vidura. Vidura is addressed here as a hero because no one is stronger in self-control than a devotee of the Lord. It appears that Kashyapa was already inclined to have sexual enjoyment with his wife, and because he was not a strong man, he tried to dissuade her only with pacifying words. O afflicted one, I shall forthwith gratify whatever desire is dear to you, for who else but you is the source of the 3 perfections of liberation. Purport. The 3 perfections of liberation are religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification. For a conditioned soul, the wife is considered to be the source of liberation because she offers her service to the husband for his ultimate liberation. Conditional material existence is based on sense gratification, and if someone has the good fortune to get a good wife, he is helped by the wife in all respects. If one is disturbed in his conditional life, he becomes more and more entangled in material contamination. A faithful wife is supposed to cooperate with her husband in fulfilling all material desires so that he can then become comfortable and execute spiritual activities for the perfection of life. If, however, the husband is progressive in spiritual advancement, the wife undoubtedly shares in his activities, and thus both the wife and the husband profit in spiritual perfection. It is essential, therefore, that girls as well as boys be trained to discharge spiritual duties, so that the time of cooperation both will be benefited. The training of the boy is brahmacharya, and the training of the girl is chastity. A faithful wife and a spiritually trained brahmachari are a good combination for advancement of the human mission. 18. One can cross over the ocean with sea-going vessels. One can cross the dangerous situation of the material ocean by living with a wife. Purport. There are 4 social orders for cooperation in the endeavor for liberation from material existence. The orders of brahmacharya, or pious student life, household life with a wife, retired life, and renounced life all depend for successful advancement on the householder who lives with a wife. This cooperation is essential for the proper functioning of the it's hyphenated from one side of the page to the other, sorry. This cooperation is essential for the proper functioning of the institution of the 4 social orders and the 4 spiritual orders of life. The Vedic Varnashrama system is generally known as the caste system. The man who lives with a wife has a great responsibility in maintaining the members of the other social orders, the brahmacharis, vanaprasthas, and sannyasis. Except for the grihastas or the householders, everyone is supposed to engage in the spiritual advancement of life, and therefore the brahmachari, the vanaprastha, and the sannyasi have very little time to earn a livelihood. They therefore collect alms from the grihastas, and thus they secure the bare necessities of life and cultivate spiritual understanding. By helping the other three sections of society cultivate spiritual values, the householder also makes advancement in spiritual life. Ultimately, every member of society automatically becomes spiritually advanced and easily crosses the ocean of nations. O respectful one, a wife is so helpful that she is called the better half of a man's body because of her sharing in all auspicious activities. A man can move without anxiety, entrusting all responsibilities to his wife. Purport. By the Vedic injunction, the wife is accepted as the better half of a man's body because she is supposed to be responsible for discharging half of the duties of the husband. A family man has a responsibility to perform 5 kinds of sacrifices called pancha yagya. In order to get relief from all kinds of unavoidable sinful reaction incurred in the course of his affairs. When a man becomes, wrong cadence. A family man has a responsibility to perform 5 kinds of sacrifice called pancha yagya in order to get relief from all kinds of unavoidable sinful reaction incurred in the course of his affairs. When a man becomes qualitatively like the cats and dogs, he forgets his duties in cultivating spiritual values, and thus he accepts his wife as a sense gratificatory agency. When the wife is accepted as a sense gratificatory agency, personal beauty is the main consideration, and as soon as there is a break in personal sense gratification, there is disruption or divorce. But when a husband and wife aim at spiritual advancement by mutual cooperation, there is no consideration of personal beauty or the disruption of so-called love. In the material world, there is no question of love. Marriage is actually a duty performed in mutual cooperation as directed in the authoritative scriptures for spiritual advancement. Therefore, marriage is essential in order to avoid the life of cats and dogs who are not meant for spiritual enlightenment. Text 20. As a fort commander very easily conquers invading plunderers, by taking shelter of a wife, one can conquer the senses, which are unconquerable in the other social orders. Purport. Of the 4 orders of human society, the student or brahmachari order, the householder, the grihastha order, the retired or vanaprastha order, and the renounced or sannyasi order, the householder is on the safe side. The bodily senses are considered plunderers of the fort of the body. The wife is supposed to be the commander of the fort, and therefore whenever there is an attack on the body by the senses, it is the wife who protects the body from being smashed. The sex demand is inevitable for everyone, but one who has a fixed wife is saved from the onslaught of the sense enemies. A man who possesses a good wife does not create a disturbance in society by corrupting virgin girls. Without a fixed wife, a man becomes a debauchee of the first order and is a nuisance in society, unless he is a trained brahmachari, vanaprastha, or sannyasi. Unless there is rigid and systematic training of the brahmachari by the expert spiritual master, and unless the student is obedient, it is sure that the so-called brahmachari will fall prey to the attack of sex. There are so many instances of fall down, even for great yogis like Vishwamrita. A grihastha is saved, however, because of his faithful wife. Sex life is the cause of material bondage, and therefore it is prohibited in 3 ashramas and is allowed only in the grihastha ashrama. The grihastha is responsible for producing first quality brahmacharis, vanaprasthas, and sannyasis. 21. O Queen of the Home, we are not able to act like you, nor could we repay you for what you have done. Even if we worked for our entire life or even after death. To repay you is not possible even for those who are admirers of personal qualities. Purport. So much glorification of a woman by her husband indicates that he is henpecked or is talking lightly in joke. Kashyapa meant that householders living with wives enjoy the heavenly blessings of sense enjoyment and at the same time have no fear of going down to hell. The man in the renounced order of life has no wife and may be driven by sex desire to seek another woman or another's wife and thus go to hell. In other words, the so-called man of the renounced order who has left his house and wife goes to hell if he again desires sexual pleasure, knowingly or unknowingly. In that way, the householders are on the side of safety. Therefore, husbands as a class cannot repay their debt to women either in this life or in the next. Even if they engage themselves in repaying the women throughout their whole lives, it is still not possible. Not all husbands are as able to appreciate the good qualities of their wives, but even though one is able to appreciate these qualities, it is still not possible to repay the debt to the wife. Such extraordinary praises by a husband for his wife are certainly in the mode of joking. 22. Even though it is not possible to repay you, I shall satisfy your sex desire immediately for the sake of begetting children. But you must wait for only a few seconds so that others may not reproach me. Purport. The henpecked husband may not be able to repay his wife for all the benefits that he derives from her, but as for begetting children by fulfilling sexual desire is not at all difficult for any husband unless he is thoroughly impotent. This is a very easy task for a husband under normal conditions. In spite of Kashyapa's being very eager, he requested her to wait for a few seconds so that others might not reproach him. He explains his position as follows. This particular time is most inauspicious because at this time the horrible-looking ghosts and constant companions of the Lord of the ghosts are visible. Purport. Kashyapa has already told his wife, Diti, to wait for a while, and now he warns her that failure to consider the particular time will result in punishment from the ghosts and evil spirits who move during this time, along with their master, Lord Rudra. Lord Shiva, the king of the ghosts, sitting on the back of his bull carrier, travels at this time accompanied by ghosts who follow him for their welfare. Purport. Lord Shiva, or Rudra, is the king of the ghosts. Ghostly characters worship Lord Shiva to be gradually guided toward a path of self-realization. Mayavadi philosophers are mostly worshippers of Lord Shiva, and Sripad Shankaracharya is considered to be the incarnation of Lord Shiva for preaching godlessness to the Mayavadi philosophers. Ghosts are bereft of a physical body because of their grievously sinful acts, such as suicide. The last resort of the ghostly characters in human society is to take shelter of suicide, either material or spiritual. Material suicide causes loss of the physical body, and spiritual suicide causes loss of the individual identity. Mayavadi philosophers desire to lose their individuality and merge into the impersonal, spiritual Brahmajyoti existence. Lord Shiva, being very kind to the ghosts, sees that although they are condemned, they get physical bodies. He places them in the wombs of women who indulge in sexual intercourse regardless of the restrictions on time and circumstance. Kashyapa wanted to impress this fact upon Diti so that she might wait for a while. Lord Shiva's body is reddish and he is unstained, but he is covered with ashes. His hair is dusty from the whirlwind dust of the burning crematorium. He is the younger brother of your husband, and he sees with his 3 eyes. Purport. Lord Shiva is not an ordinary living entity, but he is in the category of Vishnu or the Supreme Personality of... Oh, no. Lord Shiva is not an ordinary Yastu Narayanam Devam Brahma Rudradi Daivate. Lord Shiva is not an ordinary living entity, nor is he in the category of Vishnu or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is far more powerful than any living entity up to the standard of Brahma. Yet he is not on an equal level with Vishnu. Since he is almost like Lord Vishnu, Shiva can see past, present, and future. One of his eyes is like the sun, another is like the moon, and his third eye, which is between his eyebrows, is like fire. He can generate fire from his middle eye, and he is able to vanquish any powerful living entity, including Brahma. Yet he does not live pompously in a nice house, etc. Nor does he possess any material properties, although he is master of the material world. He lives mostly in the crematorium, where dead bodies are burnt, and the whirlwind dust of the crematorium is his bodily dress. He is unstained by material contamination. Kashyapa took him as his younger brother because the youngest sister of Diti, Kashyapa's wife, was married to Lord Shiva. The husband of one's sister is considered one's brother. By that social relationship, Lord Shiva happened to be the younger brother of Kashyapa. Kashyapa warned his wife that because Lord Shiva would see their sex indulgence, the time was not appropriate. Diti might argue that they would enjoy sex life in a private place, but Kashyapa reminded her that Lord Shiva has three eyes, called the sun, moon, and fire, and one cannot escape his vigilance any more than one can escape Vishnu. Although seen by the police, a criminal is sometimes not immediately punished. The police wait for the proper time to apprehend him. The forbidden time for sexual intercourse would be noted by Lord Shiva, and Diti would meet with proper punishment by giving birth to a child of ghostly character or a godless impersonalist. Kashyapa foresaw this, and thus he warned his wife Diti. Lord Shiva regards no one as his relative, yet there is no one who is not connected with him. He does not regard anyone as very favorable or unfavorable. We respectfully worship the remnants of his foodstuff, and we vow to accept what is rejected. And we vow to accept what is rejected by him. Purport. Kashyapa informed his wife that just because Lord Shiva happened to be his brother-in-law, that should not encourage her in her offense toward him. Kashyapa warned her that actually Lord Shiva is not connected with anyone, nor is anyone his enemy. Since he is one of the three controllers of the universal affairs, he is equal to everyone. His greatness is incomparable because he is a great devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is said that among all the devotees of the Personality of Godhead, Lord Shiva is the greatest. Thus, the remnants of foodstuff left by him are accepted by other devotees as Mahaprasad, or great spiritual foodstuff. The remnants of foodstuff offered to Lord Krishna are called prasad. But when the same prasad is eaten by a great devotee like Lord Shiva, it is called Mahaprasad. Lord Shiva is so great that he does not care for material prosperity, for which every one of us is so eager. Parvati, who is the powerful material nature personified, is under his full control as his wife, yet he does not use her even to build a residential house. He prefers to remain without shelter, and his great wife also agrees to live with him humbly. People in general worship Goddess Durga, the wife of Lord Shiva, for material prosperity, but Lord Shiva engages her in his service without material desire. He simply advises his great wife that of all kinds of worship, the worship of Vishnu is the highest, and greater than that is the worship of a great devotee or anything in relation with Vishnu. Now we'll take a few reflections or questions. Mahendra Prabhu.
I just noted in text 22, the Purport Prabhupada said that the so-called man in renounced order who has left his house and wife goes to hell if he again desires sexual pleasure knowingly or unknowingly. How strong is that statement? Not indulgence.
Scale of 1 to 10?
Sorry?
On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 9.5.
Yes, 9.5. Just desires goes to hell, but how can one desire unknowingly? I was wondering.
Well, if there's somebody's not intentionally trying to agitate the mind or chasing after something, but it's just overcome. Sometimes people dream things and then wake up and say, oh, well, where'd that come from? Those types of things, they come at different times from different angles. So it could be said knowingly or unknowingly. Mukaravind.
Maharaj, in the beginning, Vidura was telling that one who is actually faithful and inquisitive to hear the transcendental pastime of appearance and disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what does the faithful means?
What does it mean when he says he's faithful?
Yeah, he's one who is actually faithful and inquisitive is
it's
qualified.
Like if somebody was following you around and they said, I'm your faithful servant. Like in Bay Area, they call the 49ers, the people who follow them, the 49er faithful. They have faith in the football team. They're the faithful.
It's the same word here,
Shradatana.
Like in our context, what we can say that followers, you're saying?
Yeah,
like we are
like
Prabhupada's
say,
follower.
I'm your faithful follower. I'm one of your faithful. Just take the follower off.
Is there something called Maha Prasad also?
Yeah. There's Maha Prasad. It's Prasad, Mahaprasad, and Maha Prasad. Prabhupada explains it in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Antya-lila, where he says there's a way in which Mahaprasad is food offered to the deity, and then if a pure devotee takes that prasad afterwards, and then that's available, that's called Mahaprasad.
So probably it's not too detailed, but here in the purport it said the remnants of foodstuff offered to Lord Krishna are called prasad, but when the same prasad is eaten by a great devotee like Lord Shiva, it is called Mahaprasad.
You can look it up. There's different designations. Just means every time it's the consciousness that's there. Because if somebody just eats a bag of Doritos, stuffing in their face while they're driving their car, that's one thing. If somebody takes the time to offer something to Krishna, then there's a level of consciousness there. If it's prepared with such love and devotion as devotees do when they're in a very sanctified atmosphere and they lovingly collect the ingredients, they offer to the deity, that's another level. And then after that's been offered to a devotee, a great devotee takes it, and then there's this cascading effect of prasad. So it becomes prasad, Mahaprasad, Maha. They're not absolutely precise definitions, but they're indications of the fact that by contact of highly conscious entities like the Supreme Personality of God and His devotees, then something becomes spiritually surcharged. And more when it's successively meted out.
Thank you very much.
Let's see, outside people's party, I'm looking. So now we have a third eye. Who dey?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In text 24 of chapter 14, it says, material suicide causes loss of the physical body and spiritual suicide causes loss of the individual identity. What does spiritual suicide mean? What does it indicate?
There's a ideology that we're separated from God, but when we become perfect, we merge into Him, or we remember that we're one with God, and then we lose our identity. So there are those, as mentioned in Krishna's pastimes, demons who were killed, and they merge into the Lord's existence. And this is called sayuja, or merging. And those who merge don't have a sense of individuality. Although it's an eternal facet of the soul. In the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Sanatana Goswami mentions when Gopakumar goes to the abode of liberation and he sees the Brahmajyoti, apparently impersonal Brahmajyoti, there's a sense that even the Brahmajyoti has a personality. And that also the living beings there, he says, serve the Lord by sparkling. And the Bhagavatam and the way Prabhupada emphasized what the Bhagavatam teaches, Yeneya Ravindaksha Vimuktimaninas Tvayastavavara Vashudhat Buddhaya Aruya Krishna Paramparam Tata Patantyato Nadrita Yushmanangraya, is that some may find this kind of liberation through their practice, but then it's artificial, so eventually they'll dislodge from the amorphous oneness of Brahman in search of variety or enjoyment that comes from variety, and they'll out of necessity come to the material world because they don't have a higher taste for transcendental variety. So spiritual suicide means to give up the endeavor to become spiritually healthy and develop a relationship like Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, or Madhurya. Real health starts at Dasya.
Thank you, Maharaj.
You're welcome.
Prabhuji, I was just wondering, Kashyapa Muni is a very powerful sage, and Prabhupada explains he became weak and was overcome by the desires, and we are struggling. What chances do we have?
Prabhupada often contrasts great sages with Haridas Thakur as an example. He says because Haridas Thakur had the higher taste for chanting Hare Krishna, he was on the safe side. Real renunciation means you have somewhere better to be. And when there's some introduction of opportunity materially, not only does one have the intellectual capacity to appreciate that it's not a great idea, but also has a better engagement that allows one to procrastinate. So how can we, as Prabhupada emphasized, that we should learn how to stay constantly engaged so that there's no opportunity for Maya to come and just distract us. And we should also have the confidence that that's possible. Because one of the ways we can become victimized is by saying, well, it's possible for great people, not for me, therefore I'll just succumb because nobody expects more of me in any case. But Srila Vyasadeva makes this argument in the Vedanta Sutra that because the Shastras are speaking to all of us, it means that all of us are capable of rising to the position of being fully absorbed in a higher taste. So we should have confidence, and we should also not take any chances. That's something else Prabhupada writes in his purports, is that not only should we follow the process, but we should be careful, he said. As one of the ways in which one can fall victim to Maya is being reckless and thinking that I'm an exception, I'm entitled, I can cut corners because I've practiced for so many years, or because I have a title, or because I think I'm something special. So if one wants to stay on the safe side, it's always best to think that I'm not liberated, corners, I'm not entitled to anything special. And if one keeps oneself in that position, then there's a high likelihood that one could not succumb to victimization by the lower modes of nature. Prabhupada Priya. We're having a technical issue and we're working on it. We'll be with you in 30 seconds or less.
Hare Krishna.
Go ahead.
Just on this topic of prasadam, it's not the offering itself which qualifies it as sanctified foodstuff. And it's very important that we don't just treat the deity like a vending machine, that we can just offer, foods that are impure, that are ridden with pesticides and chemicals, and all we have to do is just give it to the pujari, and then the pujari simply rings a bell, and then that qualifies that as being sanctified. But Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, if I'm not mistaken, gives commentary on the verse Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam, that it's a holistic process beginning from the field itself, that it's actually the farmer who's yearning for that seed and nurturing that seed and watering it, and then that nutritious foodstuff is being brought into a Brahminical place where there's a devotee with high consciousness preparing the food, and it's a very long process. It's holistic. So I just wanted to mention this on the topic of prasadam and what truly is sanctified foodstuff.
In San Francisco around 1971, circa, there was a controversy because traveling Sankirtan started from there. And previously the devotees had all taken temple prasadam. And when the devotees went on the road and they were away from the temple, they couldn't get temple prasadam, so they would buy things from the store and offer it wherever they were. They didn't have deities with them. And some devotees opined that this was not prasadam. And others said, what can we do? We're on Sankirtan. So two devotees, Bhutatma Prabhu and Keshava, drove to Los Angeles, where Prabhupada was, and asked him what to do about this conundrum. And Prabhupada asked, are you on Sankirtan when you're doing this? That is, buying from the store and offering. And they said yes. In fact, Prabhupada said, is it for Sankirtan? And he went like this. They told me this personally. And it was well known in San Francisco after that time. And Prabhupada said, then it is all right, because it is offered in the fire of Sankirtan. In fact, then he gave instruction that for those who are traveling and doing book distribution, that they could offer the prasadam to the books, because they were also deities. what your point is very well taken, and everything should be done from seed to the offering with the greatest care and love. There is a case to be made, giving this anecdote, that there are other cases as well when there's a fire of Sankirtan and so forth, where Prabhupada indicated that that was also offered in the fire of Sankirtan because of the consciousness of the activity, and not only that, the necessity of it as well. So both sides can be considered. You got a real microphone now. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna. So one time we were, some devotees, and I was there with devotees, and we were discussing this section. And one devotee said that they thought that this, these statements about the wife being the source of liberation and very helpful for the husband, and that it was a nice balanced approach to other statements in the Bhagavatam that make it seem like women are Maya and all that, marriage is a fall down and that kind of thing. And then someone else in the Sangha said, well, apparently that's what it looks like, but actually Prabhupada explains that Kashyapa was joking. And so with that statement, he kind of like, so these statements that he's saying about the glories of the wife are all just, he doesn't really mean it. He's just saying these things to flatter her so that she'll stop bothering him.
There are other very poignant statements about relationship between husband and wife. One comes in the 4th canto, where Prabhupada talks about, do you know the statement? 4th canto? You can find it. He embraces, there somehow has to do with, maybe it has to do with Krishna's necklace, and talks about how the husband should keep the wife as always close, just the way one keeps a sacred stone, something like that. Anyway, in any case, we can find it later, but the fact is that there are other counterbalancing statements or qualifying statements that indicate that this is not just a joke. In the context here, it's slightly a toss-up. You could use that last sentence to say that negates everything, but Prabhupada said so much about it before the joking part came in that the way I take it is it was an awkward situation, and it was hard to discern what was going to happen, because everything was happening right in the moment. But it doesn't nullify, given the fact that there's other statements that are indicative of how one should have a mood, a loving mood. Prabhupada mentions it also, and so does Narada in the end of the 7th canto, when he's talking about Varnashram. He mentions that, as an example, a householder, man, husband, should not withhold affection from family members, as it would be detrimental to them. He said, in the name of renunciation, shouldn't be blatantly cold or falsely renounced. Part of protection of wife, family members is to give them real affection, or affection as family members. It's also important. So I'm just saying there are various, I'm not just saying, I'm also saying that there's more to flesh out the mood and get a composite. It's nice to get a composite.
And also Prabhupada's purports are kind of long, and most of what he's saying is in favor of the wife. And he says Kashyapa was joking, but if Prabhupada didn't accept that the statements that Kashyapa made were true to some extent, he wouldn't reinforce them in his purports. He would just say, oh, that's a joke. He wouldn't, continue speaking about the glories of the wife.
Right, what I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? Bamsuli?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In this context, I was thinking about one statement that Srila Prabhupada makes, that what is food for one man is poison for another. So in this context, in the purport, the recommendation of a wife is for one who is unable to control his senses, not for those who are trained brahmacharis, vanaprasthas or sannyasis. So in that sense, it's not like there is no absolute recommendation, but the recommendation is based on the consciousness and the situation of the person. So I think that that's the point I wanted to highlight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, what?
I was thinking what he was saying.
What was he saying?
That it's not like he's absolutely recommending like the sex.
Who's he?
Like Kashyap Muni, when he was talking on Prabhupada, when he was elaborating on the points on glorifying, but he's saying that okay, if someone is trained, then they don't have to do all the sex and everything. They can if they, it is for some people, but it's not for everyone. So because he's glorifying that okay, wife is like fulfilling all the desires, sex desire and everything, but it's not that is the purpose of marriage life. And as we know that it's only maybe some people need, but not like for everyone that is must. And as yesterday you mentioned that it should be only for dharmic, it should not be for any other reason. So that's why Prabhupada is also, I think, taking the balance approach at the end when he's telling that, so that everyone doesn't take that no, this is the only purpose of married life.
Yeah, the point I was making is that one of the points was there is a way in which there can be some sense of artificial renunciation. I qualify for that. I was a brahmachari for 13 years. When I got married, my wife wondered, are you a grihastha or a brahmachari? Because I had a kind of carryover from the brahmachari ashram in the sense of not being that integrated with emotional family life. And it took me a while to admit that I was actually a grihastha. And it helped to actually be able to be all right with being grihastha, because I was so into being a brahmachari. Then when I got married, there was the transition emotionally and just being there in the grihastha ashram instead of being kind of a brahmachari grihastha. I'm talking about, practically and emotionally. So that's what I'm hearing from the Bhagavatam also. It's not that, you move from one ashram to the next and then you remain a cold, kind of artificially renounced person. And I'm not talking about illicit sex, I'm talking about the way in which you interact with people, and people have certain emotional needs. So you have to be renounced enough to be able to do that. Was a revelation I had. Like, get over yourself. And like, what do you think? You're some special renunciate, even though you're in the grihastha ashram. And it helped me to learn the lessons that I needed to learn from the grihastha ashram, is to kind of be a normal person for a while. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you for explaining this so nice. I just wanted to make a note that indeed Prabhupada ends the purport of the section of the praises by stating it's in the mode of joking, but what it is in the mode of joking, the extraordinary praises. And for that, what is it? It's not possible to repay the debt of the wife. So that's an extraordinary. It's not possible to repay. It's an absolute and extraordinary statement, but it's not that all the statements are a joke. And especially the ones in the beginning where Prabhupada was very serious that the wife is a protector. And the other ashrams are much less secure. So we can't take this as a joke because Prabhupada was very serious. So this just extreme that you cannot repay you, that could be taken as a joke, not everything.
Thank you, Mahendra. Nicely put. Anything else from the outside People's Party? Avadut.
Guru Maharaj, just another question on just the topic of griha from, and just an observation I've seen is, the brahmacharis are in the ashram for some years, but there are also grihastas who are not exactly encouraging, but they're telling the brahmacharis, better you don't get married because there's so much suffering. And then, the brahmachari is thinking like, well, which do I go? And it seems like, in my mind, I'm thinking like, is there really such thing as like a happy life as a householder? Because this is like, it's so scary.
Prabhupada didn't give a lot of emphasis on these things. I remember a devotee who, there was an atmosphere surcharged by a sense of renunciation in those days. Those days means circa 1973 onward. Most people wore saffron, and there was lots of women too. They didn't wear saffron at first. Some of them did, I think, as brahmacharinis. But everything was, and when some people got married, it was considered an anomaly. Such and such got married. And one devotee on a morning walk told Prabhupada, he said, but Prabhupada, and he was considering getting married, but he's feeling guilty about it. He said, it's such a fall down. And Prabhupada said, what is a fall down for a fallen fellow? How is it a fall down for an already fallen fellow? And Prabhupada didn't he wanted us to follow strictly, but he also, even in his purports in the 8th canto, when some devotees had taken sannyas, we were jamming. Prabhupada was jamming everything. He was initiating and he was taking over the world, and he had very little time to do it, and he appointed people at different posts, and he also gave sannyas at that time. And when some of the sannyasis didn't make it, he wrote in the purport, he said, so just keep going in your Krishna consciousness. One of the main emphases that he made was not about your position in the varnashram, but was that you live a Krishna conscious life and you live your whole life in Krishna consciousness. And be inventive, because there's plenty of opportunity to live in a situation in which you're well situated and everything you need. And it doesn't matter, because the main point is that you should keep your practice going in any situation. I think that we had a more superficial view of the various ashramas and considered one so much better than the other. Over time, things evened out a little bit. We see everyone gravitates to what they need, and it's not a huge reward that somebody becomes a sannyasi. It's somebody who's thought about it for a long time, especially nowadays. You got to think about it for a few years or more and go through lots of screening and things like that. And so it's not just like, oh, somebody won the lottery, they're a sannyasi now. He wanted us to be real and practice Krishna consciousness in every situation. And he would point out to us, even though I don't think a lot of people listened, that most of Mahaprabhu's associates who were Paramahamsas and eternal associates were grihastas. When I met with Jaipataka Maharaj recently, he told me that Prabhupada told him personally, he said, many of my grihasta disciples will become Paramahamsas. And he said he wanted that. So it's not that there's an upward trajectory and then when you hit sannyas, you won. It's that whatever one needs in one's life in order to be balanced enough to go on doing Krishna consciousness and develop as holistically and truthfully develop real Krishna consciousness in all circumstances of life, like Prabhupada did, then you have something real and it's valuable. Otherwise, simple labels are simply superficial. They're only there to facilitate us when we need it to become Krishna consciousness. Krishna conscious. Otherwise, varnashram has no meaning. It's just external, completely external. It's just there as a facility for us, but it's not the whole thing. And here's the quote, which I now cannot access, unless you want to tell the password, and I'll speak it to the live stream. This is the quote I was thinking in relationship to. So the wife of King Puranjana was lying on the ground because she was neglected by her husband. Actually, the woman must be always protected by her husband. We always speak of the goddess of fortune as being placed on the chest of Narayan. In other words, the wife must remain embraced by her husband. Thus she becomes beloved and well protected. Just as one saves his money and places it under his own personal protection, one should similarly protect his wife by his own personal supervision. Just as intelligence is always within the heart, so a beloved chaste wife should always have her place on the chest of a good husband. This is the proper relationship between husband and wife. A wife is therefore called ardhangani, or half of the body. One cannot remain with only one leg, one hand, or only one side of the body. He must have two sides. Similarly, according to nature's way, husband and wife should live together. In the lower species of life, among birds and animals, it is seen that by nature's arrangement, the husband and wife live together. It is similarly ideal in human life for the husband and wife to live together. The home should be a place for devotional service, and the wife should be chaste and accepted by a ritualistic ceremony. In this way, one can become happy at home. And also, Avaduta, because of your point, I don't think we went into, it's like people, transition's always difficult. Whenever we're making a transition in our life from one situation to the next, it takes a lot of consideration. And it's not that it won't be done without some consternation. So that if we understand that, and then we're thoughtful and patient about making transitions, then it can be a lot easier. One thing that's helped over the years I've seen, as an example, is when somebody takes brahmacharya, there's a very deliberate ceremony, handing over cloth, entering into it. When somebody becomes a grihasta, then there's a similar appreciation that such and such is now making a next step. We've done these in many places. And what it does is make it legitimate that one's just making an appropriate adjustment in order to keep on doing one's devotional service. Unlike in past eras in ISKCON, Bana backed me up on this one now. If someone became a grihasta, what would happen was, it's some backroom diplomacy. You'd show up in Mangalarti, instead of going to the front, you'd stand in the back. And then it would just sort of like, hey, check out, such and such is wearing white. What happened to you? And there was just some awkward way in which somebody would make a transition to the Grihastha ashram, and they kind of walk around for the next month or two with their head down. They're like, it's all right, So we should help everybody in a community according to whatever necessary facilities they have, and appreciate the fact that it's being Krishna conscious that counts. It's not what arrangement you have to make. Everybody has a different need. Avduta, I don't know if that helps at all, but...
Keep on trucking.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, last one.
This is a different topic. It's from text 6. I'm curious here because it says that Dhruva Maharaj left this world at an early age as a young boy, although he was already a father and had several children of his own. So how is it that he was king and had children, but he was when he left the world, he left as a young boy.
I don't know. I didn't note that.
I mean, how long did he stay as a king? Was it like 30,000 years? Or something?
36,000 years, maybe. 30?
So
36. Dhruv Maharaj? 36,000. It sounds anachronistic to me. Unless there's some... Yes, Prabhu?
Isn't the meaning here of left the world is when he left
Oh,
the
left
palace?
the world. I thought
Yes.
when he left... You're saying when he left the palace.
He left the world, like he left his body.
Okay, then what?
I think left the world means left the palace.
Wait, what?
That's when he was 6 years old. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's the end of his life.
Left the world at 6 years?
It doesn't say 6, I'm saying it was text 6.
Oh. Oh.
No, that's a separate thing. It's a different clause. So he left at a young boy, and when he left his body at the end of his life, he had these other assets. That's all.
So he left
He wasn't. It's a confusing sentence. That's all.
Yeah.
It's just a confusing sentence. But we can't change it. Okay? Is everyone happy? Yes. Yeah? Avaduta, are you happy?
Never been better, Guru Maharaj.
Huh?
Never been better.
Okay. All right. We'll just read a few more minutes and take a Gayatri break, okay? Let's take a Gauranga stretch. These are all copyrighted, by the way. Gauranga. 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 5 syllables, no? Because wasn't it Shivananda saying who was doubtful of Nrsingananda Brahmachari? There was a huge crowd. And he said, okay, I'm going to mingle in the back. And if he calls me and reveals his mantra, reveals my mantra, then I'll believe that he's actually channeling Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he was there at the back, and then all of a sudden people started calling for him. And he brought him forward, and he said that Nrsingananda Brahmachari said, Your 5 syllable, is it 5 syllables? Gauranga. He said your mantra is that you're chanting is Gauranga. And now give up your doubts. Can you look it up? What was his mantra? And how many syllables he said? Where are we? Govardhan? 27. 27? Yes. Although no one in the material world is equal to or greater than Lord Shiva, and although his unimpeachable character is followed by great souls to dismantle the mass of nations, he nevertheless remains as if a devil to give salvation to all devotees of the Lord. Lord Shiva's uncivilized, devilish characteristics are never abominable because he teaches the sincere devotees of the Lord how to practice detachment from material enjoyment. He is called Mahadeva, or the greatest of all demigods, and no one is equal to or greater than him in the material world. He is almost equal with the Lord Vishnu, although he always associates with Maya, Durga. He is above the reactionary stage of the 3 modes of material nature, and although he is in charge of devilish characters in the mode of ignorance, he is not affected by such association. Unfortunate foolish persons, not knowing that he is engaged in his own self, laugh at him. Such foolish persons engage in maintaining the body, which is eatable by dogs, with dresses, ornaments, garlands, and ointments. Purport. Lord Shiva never accepts any luxurious dress, garland, ornament, or ointment. But those who are addicted to the decoration of the body, which is finely eatable by dogs, very luxuriously maintain it as the self. Such persons do not understand Lord Shiva, but they approach him for luxurious material comforts. There are two kinds of devotees of Lord Shiva. One class is the gross materialist seeking only bodily comforts from Lord Shiva, and the other class desires to become one with him. They are mostly impersonalists and prefer to chant Shivoham, I am Shiva, or after liberation I shall become one with Shiva. In other words, the karmis and gyanis are generally devotees of Lord Shiva, but they do not properly understand his real purpose in life. Sometimes so-called devotees of Lord Shiva imitate him in using poisonous intoxicants. Lord Shiva once swallowed an ocean of poison, and thus his throat became blue. The imitation Shivas try to follow him by indulging in poisons, and thus they are ruined. The real purpose of Lord Shiva is to serve the soul of the soul, Lord Krishna. He desires that all luxurious articles such as nice garments, garlands, ornaments, or cosmetics be given to Lord Krishna only, because Krishna is the real enjoyer. He refuses to accept such luxurious items himself because they are only meant for Krishna. However, since they do not know this purpose of Lord Shiva, foolish persons either laugh at him or profitlessly try to imitate him. 29. Demigods like Lord Brahma also follow the religious rites observed by him. He is the controller of the material energy which causes the creation of the material world. He is great, and therefore his devilish characteristics are simply imitation. Lord Shiva is the husband of Durga, the controller of the material energy. Durga is personified material energy, and Lord Shiva, being her husband, is the controller of the material energy. He is also the incarnation of the mode of ignorance and one of the three deities representing the Supreme Lord. As his representative, Lord Shiva is identical with the Supreme Lord. As his representative, Lord Shiva is identical with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is very great, and his renunciation of all material enjoyment is an ideal example of how one should be materially unattached. One should therefore follow in his footsteps and be unattached to matter, not imitate his uncommon acts like drinking poison. Maitreya said, Diti was thus informed by her husband, but she was pressed by Cupid for sexual satisfaction. She caught hold of the clothing of the great Brahmana sage, just like a shameless public prostitute. Purport: the difference between a married wife and a public prostitute is that one is restrained in sex life by the rules and regulations of the scriptures, whereas the other is unrestricted in sex life and is conducted solely by the strong sex urge. Although very enlightened, Kashyapa, the great sage, became a victim of his prostitute wife. Such is the strong force of material energy. 31. Understanding his wife's purpose, he was obliged to perform the forbidden acts, and thus, after offering his obeisances unto worshipable fate, he lay with her in a secluded place. Purport: it appears from the talks of Kashyapa with his wife that he was a worshipper of Lord Shiva, and although he knew that Lord Shiva would not be pleased with him for such a forbidden act, he was obliged to act by his wife's desire, and thus he offered his obeisances unto fate. He knew that the child born of such untimely sexual intercourse would certainly not be a good child, but he could not protect himself because he was too obligated to his wife. In a similar case, however, when Thakur Haridas was tempted by a public prostitute at the dead of night, he avoided the allurement because of his perfection in Krishna consciousness. That is the difference between a Krishna conscious person and others. Kashyapa Muni was greatly learned and enlightened, and he knew all the rules and regulations of systematic life, yet he failed to protect himself from the attack of sex desire. Thakur Haridas was not born of a Brahmana family, nor was he himself Brahmana, yet he could protect himself from such an attack due to his being Krishna conscious. Thakur Haridas used to chant the holy name of the Lord 300,000 times daily. Thereafter, the Brahmana took his bath in the water and controlled his speech by practicing trance, meditating on the eternal effulgence and chanting the holy Gayatri hymns within his mouth. Purport: as one has to take bath after using the toilet, so one has to wash himself with water after sexual intercourse, especially when at a forbidden time. Kashyapa Muni meditated on the impersonal Brahmajyoti by chanting the Gayatri mantra within his mouth. When a Vedic mantra is chanted within the mouth so that only the chanter can hear, the chanting is called japa. But when such mantras are chanted loudly, it is called kirtan. The Vedic hymn Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, can be chanted both softly to oneself or loudly. Therefore, it is called the Mahamantra, or the Great Hymn. Kashyapa Muni appears to be an impersonalist. Comparing his character with that of Thakur Haridas, as referred to above, it is clear that the personalist is stronger in sense control than the impersonalist. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita as param drushtva nirvartate. That is, one ceases to accept lower grade things when one is situated in a superior condition. One is supposed to be purified after taking bath and chanting Gayatri, but the Mahamantra is so powerful that one can chant loudly or softly in any condition, and he is protected from all the evils of material existence. O son of the Bharata family, Diti, after this, went nearer to her husband, her face lowered because of her faulty actions. She spoke as follows. Purport: when one is ashamed of an abominable action, one naturally becomes down-faced. Diti came to her senses after the abominable sexual intercourse with her husband. Such sexual intercourse is condemned as prostitution. In other words, sex life with one's wife is equal to prostitution if the regulations are not properly followed. The beautiful Diti said, "My dear Brahmana, kindly see that my embryo is not killed by Lord Shiva, the Lord of all living entities, because of the great offense I've committed against him." Purport: Diti was conscious of her offense and was anxious to be excused by Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva has two popular names, Rudra and Ashutosh. He is very prone to anger as well as quickly pacified. Diti knew that because of his being quickly angered, he might spoil the pregnancy she had so unlawfully achieved. But because he was also Ashutosh, she implored her Brahmana husband to help her in pacifying Lord Shiva, for her husband was a great devotee of Lord Shiva. In other words, Lord Shiva might have been angry with Diti because she obliged her husband to transgress the law, but he would not refuse her husband's prayer. Therefore, the application for excuse was submitted through her husband. She prayed to Lord Shiva as follows. And now it's time for the Gayatri break, and we'll see you back here 10 minutes after 12. Hare Krishna. Gaur Premanande Haribol.